The evolution of women protagonists as narrative tropes in the films of Alfred Hitchcock. Alfred Hitchcock, the master of suspense, was not only renowned for his psychological thrillers and twisted plots, but also for his complex portrayal of women on screen. From the innocent to the femme fatale, Hitchcock films present a wide array of female protagonists, each evolving over time. But what does it mean when these women are reduced to tropes? And how does their representation in Hitchcock's work reflect changing societal attitudes, gender dynamics, and his own directorial vision? In Hitchcock's early works, we see the propagation of what would become his hallmark treatment of women. The Lodger, from 1927, marks the first of Hitchcock's recurring motif, the innocent woman who becomes embroiled in sinister events. In this film, the central female character Daisy finds herself at the center of a mysterious murder series. Her role, however, is primarily to be an object of suspicion and desire, embodying a passive victimhood that Hitchcock would return to throughout his career. In Sabotage from 1936, the idea of a woman as a pawn in a larger narrative continues, but with a new layer of psychological complexity. Sylvia, the wife of a secret agent, is unaware that her husband is involved in espionage, and she becomes entangled in his dangerous work, symbolizing the threat of feminine vulnerability in a male-dominated world. It is revenge for her brother, another male character, one who is practically her own child, that drives her to end her husband's life. Sylvia's character development is reduced to that of a grieving mother, who takes matters into her own hands. By the 1950s, Hitchcock's leading women began to take on more agency, though still framed within certain genre conventions and stereotypes. Strangers on a Train introduces us to the character of Miriam, the adulterer fiancée to the leading man, whose reckless sexual behavior and subsequent murder become the catalyst for the psychological exploration of her killer. Though Miriam is central to the plot, she is ultimately discarded, her life and death serving as mere plot devices to drive the male characters forward. Later, in the 1950s, Hitchcock's women began to break free from the passive roles they were so often relegated to. In Rear Window, Lisa, played by Grace Kelly, challenges the trope of the innocent or victimized woman. While the film's protagonist, Jeff, is immobilized by injury, Lisa steps up to the active role, risking herself in the suspect's grasp to further their investigation. It is this dedication to their story that allows Jeff to fall for her again, but it is his physical handicap that allows her to blossom in her own right in the first place. This is a rarity in cinema from this time, and her action is admirable to this day, but was only set into motion because of the man's inability to act himself. Her transformation into a determined, resourceful woman marks a significant shift from Hitchcock's earlier films, though notably, her relationship with Jeff still centers on the male gaze. Likewise, in Shadow of a Doubt, Charlie, Teresa Wright's character, begins as a curious, eager teenager, but soon finds herself in a murder mystery involving her uncle. Although she starts out as a somewhat naive, almost childlike figure, Charlie grows in moral awareness, ultimately confronting a dark reality about her family. It can be said that her role, being still a child, contributes to her advanced lines of thinking and assumed independence. Just as gender equality was still in its youth at this time, so was the character forbearing this gender advancement. This progression shows a shift towards a more layered portrayal of women as active participants in their narratives. In Psycho, Hitchcock takes the narrative trope of the victimized woman to an extreme. Marion Crane, played by Janet Leigh, starts as a morally ambiguous character who steals money and flees to start a new life with her lover. Her brutal murder halfway through the film, an act undoubtedly unexpected and jarring, especially for the time, shocks the audience and initiates the new slasher genre conventions. The film subverts the victim trope, however, as the true focus shifts to Norman Bates and the fractured psyche that defines the rest of the film. As noted often in One Shot Hitchcock by Luke Robinson, Hitchcock often utilizes women as a mode of realization, a victim not just in heinous acts, but a victim to his directorial goals. In Psycho, Marion's death was the catalyst in exploring themes of fear, madness, and identity experienced by Norman Bates. Also in Psycho, Hitchcock's portrayal of women, while still grounded in victimhood, is rather psychologically complex compared to his earlier films. As a working woman, Marion is given the agency to commit a crime herself, albeit for the purposes of serving her lover's dwindling bank account. This imagery wouldn't have been showcased 30 years prior, during the days of The Lodger, showcasing the way that societal attitudes were changing with the times. Marion's victimization becomes a key narrative pivot, and her death, along with the shifting power dynamics between male and female characters in the movie, marks a radical departure from his earlier, more simplistic representations. Throughout Hitchcock's career, the evolution of the female protagonist reveals a complex relationship with gender, power, and identity. From the innocent women who serve as helpless pawns to the more complicated, psychologically layered characters of his later films, Hitchcock's women were often defined by their interaction with male characters, whether as victims, lovers, or objects of obsession. Even while leading their own stories, these women are almost exclusively given an objective surrounding her male counterparts, as seen with Sylvia avenging her young brother, Charlie admiring and consequently ridding her family of her con man uncle, and Marion's thievery for her lover. In the end, while Hitchcock's women may have evolved from mere plot devices into active, complex protagonists, their narrative arcs always seem to circle back to the same tragic, often fatal, endings. Alfred Hitchcock's treatment of women in his films reflects not only the fears and fantasies of his time, but also the director's complex relationship with the media of cinema itself. His women, whether victims or femme fatales, are bound by the narrative tropes he carefully crafted, showing that the representation of women in Hitchcock's cinema is inseparable from the dark psychological undercurrents that define his storytelling legacy. Thank you very much for listening.